The truth is, most people don't live, they only exist. They move through time as if life is a long rehearsal for something that never comes. Their eyes flicker across screens, their hearts beat in patterns of distraction, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet dread hums beneath it all, the fear of endings. We spend our days pretending we have endless tomorrows, but death sits silently in the room, patient, unmoving, watching. We avoid its gaze as if by ignoring it we can erase it. But in that avoidance, something tragic happens. We also erase life itself. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast, black ocean. The waves are still. The air is heavy. That ocean is death, unknowable, absolute, final. Most of us spend our lives building walls to keep it out. We distract ourselves with ambition, noise, and endless motion, hoping the waves won't reach us. But the paradox is this: the higher the walls we build, the smaller our world becomes. We begin to live cautiously, defensively, mistaking safety for meaning. We are alive in body, but asleep in spirit. The pulse is there, but it doesn't feel like living. Death isn't just a physical event. It's a mirror. It shows us the impermanence of everything we cling to: youth, status, identity, even love. And that truth terrifies us. We want to believe that what we have now will last forever, that the people we love will stay, that our reflection in the mirror will not fade. But everything in nature whispers otherwise. The leaf falls. The sun sets. The breath leaves, and yet the cycle continues. Alan Watts once said, "Death and life are not enemies, they are two sides of the same coin." But to feel that truth, not just understand it, requires courage. It requires turning toward the darkness we've spent our whole lives running from. Most people never do. They chase distractions not because they love them, but because they're terrified of the silence that waits behind them. In silence, death whispers, "One day, this will all be gone." The ego, the part of us that wants control, panics. It clings to identity, achievement, and validation as if they could build a fortress against time. But Jung wrote that only by confronting the shadow, the hidden, feared parts of the psyche, can the soul become whole. Death is the ultimate shadow. It's not an external enemy, but an inner truth we've denied. There's a moment that comes to everyone who truly sees their mortality, an unsettling, almost sacred pause. Maybe it happens after losing someone you love. Maybe in the quiet of a hospital room, or in a near miss that reminds you how fragile the body really is. In that instant, the illusion shatters. You realize how much of your life has been spent in avoidance, of pain, of change, of endings. And for the first time, you see the absurdity of it. You see how all your striving, all your anxious control, was a desperate attempt to resist what was always coming. You realize that death isn't waiting at the end of life, it's been walking beside you all along. Nietzsche believed that to affirm life, one must also affirm death. To say yes to existence is to say yes to everything, the joy and the decay, the birth and the loss. Most people only want half of life. They want the beauty without the fragility, the gain without the grief. But life doesn't work that way. To truly live, you must look the temporary in the eye and love it anyway. That's the essence of courage, not denying death, but accepting it as a teacher. When we finally stop running from death, something remarkable happens. The noise quiets. The endless striving softens. The moments begin to taste richer, not because they last, but because they don't. The coffee in the morning feels sacred. The laughter of a friend sounds eternal for just a second. The sky, the same one you've seen 1,000 times, suddenly feels alive. This is the hidden gift of death. It gives meaning to every fleeting thing. Without it, time would have no urgency, love would have no depth, and existence would be nothing but a flat, unending line. But this realization doesn't come easily. It asks you to surrender, to let go of control, to allow endings to exist. It asks you to stand in the truth that everything you love will one day pass, and yet, to love it even more fiercely because of that. This is not a truth for the faint of heart. It breaks the ego, but it awakens the soul. When you face death, not as an intruder but as a companion, you begin to understand what it means to be truly alive. Life is not measured by its length but by its depth. The people who seem most alive are often those who've faced the shadow, who've stood at the edge of loss and looked into the void without flinching. They've learned that death doesn't steal life, it reveals it. It strips away everything false, everything unessential, until only truth remains. That truth is this: you were never meant to last forever. You were meant to shine for a moment, brightly, fiercely, beautifully, and then return to the same stillness from which you came. And so, the story begins here, in that space between fear and surrender, between the heartbeat and the silence that follows. The moment you stop denying death, you stop merely existing. You start living. To understand what it truly means to live with the awareness of death, we must first confront how our minds have been conditioned to reject it. Modern culture has turned mortality into a taboo, a forbidden subject spoken of only in whispers and avoided in daily life. We decorate death with euphemisms: passed away, gone to a better place, softening it into something distant and unreal. But this denial doesn't free us. It enslaves us. Because when you push death out of sight, you also push out the depth of life itself. Without the shadow, there is no contrast for light. Without the end, the beginning loses its meaning. Carl Jung believed that wholeness comes from integrating what we fear, the shadow aspects of existence we try to hide. Death is the greatest of those shadows. To reject it is to remain fragmented, half awake, disconnected from our deeper nature. When we ignore the reality of death, we live in constant tension, a subconscious dread that leaks into every corner of our behavior. We cling tighter to possessions, chase validation, avoid stillness, and fill our days with motion, terrified that if we stop, we'll have to face the truth of impermanence. It's strange, isn't it? We want security, yet we live in a world where everything changes. The very fabric of life is built on impermanence. Every breath, every season, every heartbeat. Yet we spend our lives fighting that rhythm. Nietzsche called this resistance the denial of life. Because to love life is to love its transience. When you deny death, you deny the pulse of existence itself. You flatten it into something mechanical and shallow, stripped of wonder. Think about how children see the world. To them, everything is alive: the wind, the grass, the passing clouds. They have not yet learned to fear endings. Every moment feels eternal because they are fully in it. But as we grow older, awareness of mortality creeps in, and instead of embracing it, we run. We create distractions that numb us: success, consumption, endless busyness. We mistake activity for purpose. We try to conquer time rather than dance with it. The irony is that the more we run from death, the less we actually live. Alan Watts once said, "Trying to control life is like trying to hold your breath. You suffocate yourself in the process." This is what we do when we try to escape mortality. We cling so tightly to permanence that we lose the fluidity that makes life beautiful. The tree grows, blooms, sheds its leaves, and stands bare again, and in that cycle, it is more alive than we are in our constant resistance. The tree accepts death not as an end but as renewal. In many ancient philosophies, death was not feared, it was honored. The Stoics meditated on it daily: memento mori, remember you must die. Not as a morbid obsession, but as a tool for presence. When you remember death, the noise falls away. The petty frustrations lose their power. You start to see the absurdity of the things you worry about. The missed call, the unkind comment, the fear of failure, all become dust in the face of mortality. It is not despairing to think of death, it is liberating. Because once you realize how temporary everything is, you begin to live with urgency, honesty, and gratitude. But modern psychology often hides from this truth. We speak of anxiety and depression as if they are purely chemical, detached from the existential terror of being alive. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, argued the opposite, that our suffering often comes not from what happens to us, but from the lack of meaning we attach to it. When death is denied, meaning collapses. Why strive? Why love? Why create? When we pretend death doesn't exist, life becomes an empty game. But when we accept death, everything becomes sacred. Even suffering gains a strange beauty, because it reminds us that we are alive. This is the paradox of awakening. To live fully, you must die before you die. The ego, that fragile sense of identity, must face its own impermanence. Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the conscious and unconscious self, the death of the false self so that the true self can emerge. In every major transformation, something must be surrendered. The old skin must fall away. The version of you that was obsessed with control, with image, with survival, it cannot follow you into wholeness. It must dissolve. There's a moment in every deep spiritual or psychological awakening that feels like death. The life you knew begins to crumble. Relationships end, identities break, meaning evaporates. At first, it feels like loss. But what's actually dying is illusion. Nietzsche's idea of amor fati, to love one's fate, is an invitation to embrace this process. To not just accept the inevitable changes, but to love them as essential to growth. Every ending becomes a beginning. Every fall, a transformation. The closer you come to death, physically, emotionally, or symbolically, the more you understand what truly matters. The material layers peel away, and what remains is astonishingly simple: presence, connection, creation, love. These are the only things death cannot touch. They exist beyond time, because they are not things, they are experiences. They are states of being. And yet, we only access them fully when we stop clinging to the illusion of permanence. In Jungian terms, death represents the dissolution of the ego's boundaries, the merging of the personal self with the greater unconscious, the whole. In more spiritual language, this is transcendence. To die before you die is to awaken from the dream of separateness. It is to realize that the I, who fears death, was never the whole truth of who you are. You are not the body that decays, nor the identity that fades. You are the awareness that experiences both. And awareness cannot die, it only changes form. The fear of death, then, is the fear of losing control, of losing the illusion of solidity. But control is a myth. The moment you were born, you began to die. Every breath is a surrender, an exchange of life and decay. Yet in that surrender lies freedom. When you stop resisting, you begin to flow with the rhythm of existence instead of fighting against it. You see that death is not destruction, but transformation. This is the wisdom the mystics and philosophers tried to tell us, that death is not the opposite of life, but its partner. It is what gives life its weight, its urgency, its beauty. Without death, there would be no art, no love, no courage, because nothing would be at stake. To accept death is to accept reality as it is, raw, fleeting, and magnificent. So when we talk about accepting death, we are not talking about passivity. We are talking about awakening, a radical shift in perception. It's about realizing that every moment is both dying and being born, that the present itself is a constant vanishing point. When you finally stop clinging, you don't fall into despair. You fall into life, into an aliveness so vivid it almost hurts. And that is the paradox every philosopher eventually encounters. The closer you walk toward death, the more intensely you begin to feel alive. Something begins to shift the moment you truly let death in, not as an idea, but as a lived truth that hums beneath your skin. At first, it feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind of impermanence against your face, daring you to leap. The mind hesitates, the heart tightens. Every instinct screams to turn back toward the familiar safety of denial. But once you step off that ledge, once you let go of the illusion of permanence, something unexpected happens. You don't fall, you fly. The fear that once imprisoned you dissolves, and in its place, a strange, liberating peace emerges. You finally understand that life was never meant to be controlled. It was meant to be lived. Transformation doesn't come gently. It comes like fire, consuming everything false, everything you've built to protect yourself. The persona, the roles, the expectations, all begin to burn away under the light of mortality. At first, you mistake this burning for destruction. But soon, you see that it's purification. The flame doesn't come to punish you, it comes to reveal you, to strip away what was never real. You begin to sense that what you called you was only a temporary pattern, a ripple on the surface of something infinitely deeper. Carl Jung described this moment as the death of the ego, the necessary collapse before the emergence of the true self. When we face death, we're not just facing the end of our physical form, we're confronting every attachment, every illusion that has kept us asleep. And in that confrontation, something timeless awakens. You realize that the part of you that fears death is not the part of you that is. The awareness observing the fear, that stillness behind thought, that is what remains. There's a quiet power in this realization. Suddenly, the rush for validation fades. The obsession with legacy, comparison, and recognition loses its grip. You begin to live from a deeper center, one that doesn't depend on outcomes. You no longer strive to be someone, you simply are. Every breath becomes enough. Every sunrise, a gift. This isn't resignation, it's rebirth. Because when death is no longer your enemy, life is no longer a battle. You start to notice beauty in places you never did before. The way sunlight touches a wall. The way a stranger laughs in the distance. The way silence itself feels alive. These are not small things, they are everything. They are the texture of existence. When you stop running, when you stop fearing, you begin to see, truly see, that every ordinary moment is a miracle unfolding right before you. Nietzsche once said, "What if one day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, 'This life as you now live it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more?' Could you embrace that? Could you love your fate enough to live it again and again, with all its suffering and impermanence? That's the test of transformation, to move from resisting life to affirming it completely. When you face death, when you've stood naked before the void, there's nothing left to fear. You begin to live with a boldness that only mortality can grant. Viktor Frankl discovered this truth in the darkest of places, the concentration camps of World War II. Surrounded by death, he saw that meaning doesn't disappear in suffering, it becomes sharper. When everything is stripped away, you discover what cannot be taken. You find that purpose is not in what you get from life, but in what you give to it. Meaning is not handed to you, it's created in the way you choose to respond. And in that creation, you transcend death itself. There's an ancient saying from Zen Buddhism, "To die before you die is to realize there is no death." When you experience this inner death, when the ego collapses and you awaken to the stillness beneath, you discover that life and death are not opposites. They are one movement, the inhale and the exhale, the wave and the ocean. What you thought was an ending was only a change in form. You were never the wave, you were always the water. Once you see this, your relationship with time changes completely. You stop trying to rush through life as if you're running out of it. You stop living for someday. Because you realize this breath, this moment, this heartbeat, is all you ever had, and it's enough. The mind stops projecting into the future or clinging to the past. You begin to live vertically, not horizontally, diving into the depth of each moment rather than stretching endlessly across them. And with that, a subtle but profound peace takes root. You stop searching for meaning in achievement or permanence, because you realize meaning is already here, in presence itself. The need to prove, to accomplish, to be remembered, fades away. You no longer live to leave a mark on time, but to experience time fully, consciously, as it passes through you. This is freedom, not the freedom of escape, but the freedom of surrender. But surrender doesn't mean weakness. It means trust. Trust in the unfolding of life, even when you don't understand it. Trust that everything, even loss, belongs. You realize that the same intelligence that gives life to a star, to a tree, to a breath, is the same intelligence that will take it away, and that nothing is wasted. Nothing is truly lost. Every ending feeds another beginning. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of awakening. It's not about transcending the human experience, but embracing it fully, joy, pain, uncertainty, all of it. When you live with death in your heart, you live honestly. You speak truthfully. You love without holding back. Because you know that every encounter, every smile, every word might be the last. And that awareness turns even the simplest act into something sacred. To accept death is to open yourself to life's fullness, not the filtered version we chase, but the raw, unguarded aliveness that exists beneath fear. You begin to live from the soul, not the ego. You begin to understand that the goal was never to escape mortality, but to use it as a compass, a reminder of what truly matters. When death becomes your teacher, life becomes your art. And maybe that's what it really means to be alive. To live knowing it will end, yet to love it completely anyway. To walk through impermanence not as a victim, but as a participant, aware, awake, and unafraid. Because once you've faced death and found life on the other side, you realize there was never anything to fear. You were never preparing to live, you were living all along. And now, we return to where we began, to that quiet, haunting truth we spend our lives avoiding, that everything we love will one day fade. But this time, it feels different. The fear has softened. The truth no longer feels like a threat, it feels like freedom. You begin to see that death was never the enemy. It was the mirror, showing you what was real all along. You start to notice how life keeps teaching you the same lesson in 1,000 subtle ways. The sunset that vanishes just as you start to admire it. The laughter that fades into silence. The people who come and go. Every loss, every change, every ending is whispering the same message. Nothing stays, and that's what makes it beautiful. We spend so much of our lives clinging to what we cannot keep, and in doing so, we miss the only thing we ever had, the living moment. Modern life seduces us into believing we can outsmart impermanence. We immortalize ourselves through technology, chase longevity as if eternity were a prize. But deep down, the soul knows that to be infinite would be unbearable. It's the limitation that gives life meaning. It's the brevity that gives birth to urgency, to love, to art. Every heartbeat matters because there are only so many. Every day matters because it ends. The awareness of death isn't a curse, it's the compass that points us back to the present. Alan Watts once said, "The meaning of life is just to be alive." It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. Yet everyone rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. When you finally make peace with death, that panic dissolves. You stop chasing meaning as if it were hidden somewhere outside of you. You stop trying to win life. You start living it. You breathe deeper. You love without restraint. You forgive more easily not because it's easy, but because you understand how short the dance really is. The most alive people you'll ever meet are not the ones who escaped suffering, they're the ones who embraced it. They've sat in silence with their grief. They've faced the terror of endings and found peace inside it. They live with a quiet intensity, a softness that only comes from knowing how fragile everything is. These are the people who no longer wait for life to begin, they're already in it. Fully. Fearlessly. Death no longer follows them like a shadow, it walks beside them as a guide. And that guide whispers, "Don't waste this. Don't waste the sunrise. Don't waste the chance to tell someone you love them. Don't waste another day waiting to feel ready. Because you will never be ready. Life doesn't ask for readiness, it asks for presence." So perhaps the meaning of all this, the reason we fear death, run from it, deny it, is because it's the final invitation. The one truth that forces us to wake up. To stop existing half alive and finally feel the weight of the moment pressing against our chest. Death tells us you don't have forever, but you have now. And that's enough. So breathe. Look around you. Feel the warmth of being here, now, in this fleeting miracle. Because one day, the breath will leave, but today it hasn't. Today you are alive. And that is everything.